It is really annoying our NATO allies that we're claiming to be leaders in NATO and in Europe. We provide the leadership of NATO, and they're looking to us and going, no, you don't.
On the Times front page, it does focus on this extraordinary number. And Kate's asked a brilliant question, which we don't know the answer to, is what would they have done if Andy Burnham wasn't taking over? Would they have still said to themselves, we're laying this trap for ourselves? Or is this why the Defence Investment Plan wasn't actually signed until now? Because $5 billion is missing from it. Burnham is going to have to find $5 billion in his first budget to pay for the commitments made by Keir Starmer in the Defence Investment Plan, which he's already nodded through himself. The Defence Investment Plan, that is, not the extra $5 billion. After much wrangling and the resignation of his Defence Secretary, the outgoing Prime Minister agreed to spend £15 billion over 4 years extra to upgrade the military. But the Times has looked at the small print and found that spending gap. Let's talk to Francis Tusa, the editor of Defence Analysis. Francis, morning to you.
Morning, Stig.
So there's a lot of numbers here, a lot of big numbers. £15 billion extra for the armed forces, which many will welcome. But there's no plan on where $5 billion of that will come from.
And as you've already mentioned, there was then the stinger in the tail of, you have to find 10.7 billion in savings. And every year the MOD says, the budget's going to do this, and we have to find X in savings. They never find the savings, ever. So we are looking to say that the Defence Investment Plan has a whole load of smoke and mirrors is understatement of the century. It bandies big facts and figures around, which you can't then work out where they've got these figures from. And towards the very back of the document, there is a table sort of adding up all of the commitments. And it's 30 billion short of the headline figure, 298 billion, that everyone talks about. And by the way, with Dan Jarvis, if he tries to say the investment in defence for the next 4 years is 298 billion, call him out, because that's a lie. 298 billion is what the cumulative defence budget is for 4 years. It is not the investment. What people would understand normally about investment is equipment, equipment support and things like that. That is not 298 billion. It's probably 90 billion. 95 billion. So actually ask him what that figure is. And if he can't tell you, it just shows you the whole exercise has been a waste of time.
And explain that thing about the £10 billion of efficiencies. They never make the efficiencies.
Yeah.
So if they find an extra £15 billion extra and they don't make the efficiencies, the first place that money will go is to cover that whole of the efficiencies they're not making. Is that true?
Yeah, pretty much. To go back to one of the original figures bounced around, the 28 billion that the MOD said they needed, that wasn't to implement the Strategic Defence Review. And the MOD, funnily enough, is a bit wary about getting into the detail on this. Somewhere between 12 and 16 billion of that was existing shortfalls in the defence budget. Problems with programme overruns, spending overruns, you name it. So the 28 billion was never about new money. At least half of that was about, we basically broken the piggy bank. Can we have some more money, please? And I say this very rarely. I'm with the Treasury, who just said, no, we're not going to fund that. That's your problem.
Is there a path to 3%, then 3.5% of GDP? That's the other promise that's being airily made and will indeed have to be made to Donald Trump in NATO next week.
And actually, do you know what's more important than Donald Trump, who is not that relevant to NATO at the moment? It is all of the UK's allies in Europe who, I know, speaking to defence attachés and other defence figures, they're going, hey, we are freezing health spending, we are freezing or cutting welfare spending to fund defence. Why can't you do the same? Last week there was a quite large NATO advisory committee meeting in the UK where the sort of outcomes, people saying the UK is increasingly irrelevant to NATO and may actually even be a liability because we just are not standing up. And people in Europe, especially when you go further east, Poland, Finland, the Baltic states, they're getting a little bit fed up with the UK and the likes of Keir Starmer saying, we are leaders in NATO. And they're going, no, you're not.
The difference in the rhetoric and the reality in this, I think, is capable of winding people up. So what you're saying, really, this idea of 3.5% of GDP on defence spending is just not going to... To be honest with ourselves, it's just not going to happen.
Either you can put out there an actual plan saying it's X this year, Y the year after, Z the year after that. You can put those figures out there and say, here are the assumptions about GDP growth, you name it, and then let people look at them and go, yeah, okay, that seems about right. We promise in the future this will happen. People aren't buying this. Our European allies, and I doubt the United States, they are not buying this. So yeah, this is, as you put in your introduction, a very nice poison pill for Andy Burnham.
How far would you go on this front? So I'm trying to work this out. Is disgrace too strong a word for what we've got here? Because we've spent the last, I think many people feel this. We hear from politicians all the time how dreadful a situation we're facing, the threat of Russia. They use phrases like we're effectively at war, we could be at war by 2030. They paint a very, very bleak picture about the safety of the world. And then they say, and we're doing all we can to make sure we defend the realm properly by investment. And then you get this, which has taken such a long time, so much horse trading, and clearly at a certain level is fraudulent. How hard would you be in terms of a criticism of that?
I don't think I can disagree with a single word you've said there. There is a phrase which is getting more and more currency. It's called the say-do gap. We say one thing, and we do something totally, or nearly totally, unconnected with what we say. And again, it is really annoying our NATO allies that we're claiming to be leaders in NATO and in Europe. We provide the leadership of NATO, and they're looking to us and going, no, you don't. And it's this issue of what's it? The first stage of addiction is admitting you're an addict. It would help if there was a realization, an understanding, and a recognition that, we are not leaders in NATO. Yes, we have nuclear weapons. Fine, brilliant. So does France. But for the rest of it, we are not leaders. We are not standing up to our alliance requirements and pledges. And I think the worrying thing is, were we to be called upon, let's say, Russian troops go into Estonia, and the Estonians invoke Article 5 of the NATO treaty, an attack on one is an attack on oil, we run the risk of paying the price in the blood of servicemen and women because we simply aren't prepared.
Francis Tusa, great speaker. Thank you for joining us. He is the editor of Defence Analysis. I mean, we've waited a long time for this. I mean, Ian makes the point the UK is the third largest contributor to NATO after the USA and Germany. That is true. I don't want to use phrases like in fraudulent or disgraceful, but there's definitely something fundamentally wrong about this. And this, I think, is a broader point about politics. Okay, this winds people up about politics. That the say-do gap, as Francis puts it. If you had to say what's the heart of the problem with cynicism about politics, it's that, the difference between the rhetoric and reality. And this seems to be an extraordinary, clear example of that.
I think it is, and I think the timing of this is also really very difficult indeed, because we are heading to the NATO summit, if you can even call it that. It's very short this year. It's only really one family dinner and one big meeting. But the entire aim of that NATO summit is to ensure that all of the NATO allies and partners are on track to basically develop their collective funding structures to be able to look at, being competitive and picking up the mantle from the Americans. And, Francis is right. It's not just about thinking about Donald Trump's reaction, but it is worth just pausing and thinking about these previous summits and how the president has turned up, the mood he's turned up in. The White House is consistently saying the Americans want the allies in NATO to be spending 5% of GDP. Now, that does include some other areas of investment, but that 3% target is the very basic baseline that the former Defence Secretary John Healey is saying we should be meeting by 2030. Yeah. At the moment, we're only on track for 2.7%. And if you think about how difficult it's been for this government to find just this very small amount in that context, getting to 3% by then looks really very difficult indeed, if not impossible. And then we've got the leap to 3.5%. And, I think when you've got one of the most senior figures in NATO who used to be, there until March from this country, former military boss saying at the moment the UK is a leader, but not for very long unless we step up. We've got to have a conversation as a country. Is that where we're happy to be? And if the answer is yes, we don't need to be a leader anymore, then okay, fine, we step back. But we've got to stop saying we're leading the pack.
We can't have that conversation if no one's honest with us. And this seems to be a fundamentally dishonest plan. And we talk about the legacy of Keir Starmer. Well, he came into power saying, I'm going to be upfront and straightforward and honest. And this seems to me to be the act of just a typical, stereotypical almost, scheming politician that baffles you with large numbers and beneath which lies a brutal truth that they don't have the money, they don't have the political will to get the money, and they're going to just try and look us in the eye and say everything in the garden is rosy.
Strangely, I think up until this point that is true. I think perhaps because the Prime Minister is leaving office, actually the speech yesterday was quite honest in the sense that he actually said up front, we will be cancelling road schemes, we will be removing money from things that we don't need to do right now. They haven't tried to pretend that that's not happening, and it's caused a lot of upset around the country, and it will continue to do so. But the efficiency savings point that Francis Tusa makes is a really important one. The MOD budget overruns as a matter of course. It happens all the time, and they are consistently asked to find billions of pounds worth of funding of efficiency savings in year, and they don't do it. Either we have to get a grip on the way that the funding model works and change that, or we have to accept that the budget needs to go up. And for context, we're talking about 60-70 billion pounds a year of money spent on defence. If you think about that in comparison to the welfare budget, even if you take pensions out of that, it's about 156 billion pounds a year just spent on welfare spending. So it's about priorities.
I think this compromises Starmer's reputation. I think it compromises Dan Jarvis's reputation. Dan Jarvis isn't coming out this morning. He's sending his deputy Luke Pollard. Let's see what Luke Pollard can make, because he'll say to you, I can hear it now. Massive investment. We're making massive investment to keep the country safe. That's the line he's going to be trying to hold.
But that can be true at the same time as it not being enough.
That's
Both
exactly
of those
right.
things can be true at once.
And how much obfuscation is someone is just saying? Kevin's just saying how much obfuscation is going on at the same time.